be the equivalent of BBC Radio 4, at least we aim for these big shoes, and we certainly have been modeled on the BBC Radio 4 program after the war. But this is not about after the war, this is about after Brexit. First of all, I invite you cordially to join in our conversation via the chat. Let me introduce you to Slide. I'm sure you have seen it before. The system behind it, you can use it as a chat box throughout the event. Please ask questions, and I will try my very best to pass them on to our panel members. Slido allows you to put your questions anonymously or by mentioning your name, either in English or in German, and I'll translate them. And throughout our panel discussion, you can contribute. Furthermore, I encourage you to support a question you spot there and that you find interesting. Voting for it means it will show up as very prominent, so it will rank higher on the Slido board, and which means I'm likely to prioritize it here with our panelists. Let's get started now by introducing Professor Joybrato Mukherjee. I'm sure I don't have to introduce him, but I do as president of the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service. Mr. Mukherjee, you are head of the largest international organization for the exchange of academics and students equally. Moreover, you are president of the University of Gießen. Your interest in what we're discussing today is not only informed by these two roles, but also by you being a professor of English. So the UK is close to your heart, both in an academic sense and on a personal level. We're looking forward to your introductory remarks about Brexit, the new normal for Anglo-German academic cooperation.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, for this kind introduction. And indeed, yeah, the UK is very dear to my heart, given my professional profile that you just sketched out. I would like to thank, first of all, Vivienne Stern, Sally Mapstone, Eva Maria Feichtner, Ruth Pryor, and Nick Hillman for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Brexit is upon us. During the almost one-year transition phase, we were still able to indulge in the illusion that things would remain the same despite the UK's formal withdrawal from the EU on the 31st of January 2020. Now that the transition phase is over, however, we are beginning to realize just how profoundly relations have changed. The welcome news of the free trade agreement concluded at the last minute in December, and the UK's ongoing participation in the EU research funding program Horizon Europe has been overshadowed. There is a great sense of disappointment on both sides of the channel that the UK will not be participating in the EU's flagship education program in the future. Its withdrawal from the Erasmus Plus mobility program brings about a lasting and far-reaching shift in the overall context in which UK, European and German universities develop their exchange and cooperation relations. Erasmus Plus is a low-threshold scheme that motivates students to embark on a truly European journey. It also frequently plants a seed in the mind of those students who later go on to pursue an interest in international cooperation in the field of research, politics, or business. The program fosters an intellectual bond among the young generation in Europe. Over the years, it has become a hallmark for the freedom of movement in Europe and almost a way of life for students. For German Erasmus Plus students in particular, the UK has been the most popular exchange country to date after Spain. The DAAD has funded some 5,000 Erasmus students going to the UK from Germany every year, while some 2,500 students and interns visited Germany from the UK under the same program every year. Even after Brexit, UK universities will remain some of the strongest research hubs in the world. They are still closely interwoven with the German science system and will continue to offer highly attractive study destinations for German students, and they will remain crucial partners to researchers and higher education institutions based in Germany. As such, the UK's exit from the EU is not just a British challenge. It is also a major issue for Germany and for German higher education institutions, whose close cooperation with some of the world's top universities now has to adapt to a new environment. This is something we must be sure to bear in mind in our considerations, not least during the course of our discussion today. Fortunately, Erasmus funding within the old program generation will not be terminated immediately. For the next 2 years, Erasmus scholarships are still available, and stays incurring low tuition fees are possible. We should make use of this transitional period to develop alternative access routes and financing models for students. From a German perspective, a European approach would be desirable in the long term. In the short term, I believe that what we need most of all is to swiftly establish a close network of new bilateral higher education agreements between UK and German universities. I look forward to hearing from our guests to find out whether this idea has any chance of success from the UK perspective. The DAAD's involvement in the UK is and will continue to be very diverse. In cooperation with UK higher education institutions, the DAAD currently supports 23 lectureships in German language, literature, and regional studies, as well as 12 subject-specific lectureships, mainly in history, law, and political science. Together with the Volkswagen Foundation and the University of Freiburg, we sponsor a visiting lectureship in medieval German literature and linguistics at the University of Oxford. Last year, the first professor was appointed to a DAAD-funded long-term lectureship in Eastern European Jewish history at the Weidenfeld Institute, University of Sussex. Now, one thing is certain. Global challenges will continue to have an impact on us in the future, be it because of pandemic control, global climate change, global justice, digitalization, or migration. Interdisciplinary projects pursued by excellent researchers are needed more than ever to jointly address such questions and develop solutions for them. In many cases, cutting-edge European research will only be able to remain internationally competitive in the future if it is based on a viable Anglo-German core. This applies to contemporary German and European studies too. Since 2016, the DAAD has funded the DAAD University of Cambridge Research Hub for German Studies, the first dedicated research center within the network of DAAD-funded centers for German and European studies. This must be maintained and expanded, along with numerous other bilateral and multilateral collaborative ventures, such as the strategic partnership between Cardiff University and Bremen University, which Professor Feichtner can report on, or the Oxford-Berlin University Alliance, as well as more than 1,600 other university partnerships. As I see it, the focus of today's discussion is the question of which strategies UK and German universities can develop together to continue, expand, or strategically redefine these successful collaborations given the new situation. In any case, we at DAAD headquarters here in Bonn are very interested in supporting German universities in their efforts to further expand and strengthen bilateral partnerships with their partner universities in the UK. The DAAD's Competence Centre for International Scientific Cooperation, which prepared this event, in short KIWi, also offers an advisory service for universities to address individual questions. As the largest funding institution in the field of higher education worldwide, the DAAD is seeking to work with German universities and their UK partners to develop ideas as how to continue to maintain good relations in the new context. Our discussion today with our valued guests will contribute significantly to this. Following today's debate, we will explore our experts' ideas further with all interested parties in an impulse paper. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to an interesting and hopefully encouraging discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukherjee. So I'm glad you mentioned it along the lines of if there are 7 stages of grief, according to Mrs. Kubler-Ross, maybe we enter the phase of acceptance where we have to come to terms with Brexit being on the table. But you mentioned we still have 2 years of Erasmus transition to work this out. Let me challenge you here shortly. Universities on both sides are grappling now with pandemic and grappling with getting students back on campus. Do they, especially the smaller ones of them, do they have the capacity right now to deal with the implications of Brexit?
Well, those universities in Germany who have long established partnership with British higher education institutions, of course, place a special emphasis on trying to find out how to bring these partnerships into a future environment after Brexit. And I do think it's not a matter of whether they want to discuss this, it's a matter of must. And we have to use the next 2 years wisely, I feel. We have to use these 2 years to prepare for a new environment after the Erasmus program, to keep the exchange between UK and Germany as alive as possible when it comes to the range and depth of exchange between UK and German universities. So my impression is all German universities are looking for new opportunities, are asking the DAAD for providing new pathways, and are engaged in discussions with their UK partners.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, you're giving advice, you're offering advice to universities who want to deepen their bonds with their UK counterparts. But let's not beat around the bush. German universities will want to know whether you can potentially step in financially as well, whether you can at least partly make up for what has been lost by the UK's withdrawal from Erasmus+. Is there a way of answering this diplomatically?
Well, diplomacy, that's our core mission, I guess, at DAAD headquarters. Of course, I mean, I just mentioned the figures in passing. 5,000 every year in one direction, 2,500 in the other direction. That's an enormous number. And I guess there is no way, of creating a program that replaces Erasmus when it comes to the scope, the depth, and the range and the intensity of the exchange over the last years and decades. So what we need now is really a combination of various instruments. One instrument definitely is that a German University X establishes some kind of agreement with a UK University Y within their established partnership program, perhaps with an inbuilt tuition waiver, fee waiver. Another option is that we as DAAD talk to the federal ministries in Germany to establish new funding programs to support these bilateral programs between German and UK partners. But of course, what we can't establish as DAAD is a new program that would be able to replace the scope and the intensity of Erasmus.
Let me ask you a last question before we move to the panel. The UK has so far been far more popular with German students than the other way around. So, and you mentioned it, are we now to acknowledge the full impact of this in terms of, do we have to accept that roughly half of the students who so far have been able to spend a semester or a year in the UK are likely to miss out on this experience?
I hope not. I hope that we will find a way of providing this wonderful opportunity of intercultural exchange and studying at a UK university, that we can provide this wonderful opportunity to as many students in the future as possible. There are financial issues involved. There are legal issues involved when it comes to visa regulations that are new now in the post-Brexit phase. But I do believe there is one mission or one message that we have to hammer home. and that is that the Brexit, academically speaking, Brexit is not a UK problem alone. Brexit is a German problem, a German challenge, especially when it comes to the issue of student exchange. I mentioned the figures, I mentioned the data, and when you look at the figures, this is a German challenge as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukherjee, for being upfront as well. Now, while we keep an eye on your opening remarks and we are going to embark on the panel, let me introduce in alphabetical order. To start with, Eva Maria Feichtner. You are Vice President of International and Diversity at the University of Bremen for 4 years now. Your career in mathematics led you to the Technical University of Germany, where you acquired a PhD, to the most renowned universities in her field, the MIT in Cambridge, USA, the Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Princeton. After becoming an assistant professor in Zurich and after being appointed professor at the University of Stuttgart, you moved on to the University of Bremen, where you are currently, where you still work as a professor of mathematics, only interrupted by various visiting appointments at the Mathematical Science Research Institute in Berkeley and various research visits at universities in the US, Canada, Sweden, Italy, and Japan. Your research interest focuses primarily on the application of discrete methods in pure mathematics. Welcome, Eva Maria Feichtner.
Thank you very much.
Nick Hillman, you are very well known as the director of the Higher Policy Institute in the UK, which you have been leading for 7 years now. Nick, you started off as a history teacher, then you moved on to the Association of British Insurers, and then you were attracted by the political sphere, I gather. You've been working for the former Tory MP Member of Parliament, David Willetts, who is now Lord Willetts and member of the House of Lords. You also worked for the Minister for Universities and Science, and from 2007 to 2013 as Chief of Staff and Special Advisor in the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills. I'm well aware, Nick, that you are going to be the only man on this panel, and you're the only man with an inside perspective and a Tory perspective on this topic. So we are very much looking forward to what you have to say on this.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ruth Krah, you are head of the London branch of DAAD, the German Academic Research Service. You studied political science and Anglistik, which means English literature and linguistics, in Bonn and Nottingham. And from what I heard from you, the latter being a very formative experience for you. And being a graduate of English literature too, as Mr. Mukherjee and as Sally Mapstone and Vivienne Stern, English literature and linguistics is slightly overrepresented here. But never mind, having worked for DAAD in various positions for 23 years now, you're now in a key position to give advice to universities in Germany on how to further proceed in their bilateral cooperation with UK counterparts, as director of the London branch of the DAAD. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sally Mapstone, I'm also delighted to have you here on board. You are Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, one of the most renowned and most highly ranked universities in the United Kingdom, and also special in the fact that you are almost second to none in terms of international students. You have a lot of US students in St Andrews, a lot of Chinese students, and so far European students too. But before we come to this, I'll zoom back into your academic career. Before taking up the role of Principal of St Andrews, and 5 years ago, you spent your career at the University of Oxford, where you were, broadly speaking, specialized in medieval Scottish literature. Is that right?
Yep.
You are also a member of Universities UK, which might be comparable to the German Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, and you're vice convener of University Scotland. And last but not least, you are an DAAD alumna.
Indeed.
Vivienne Stern, I apologize for skipping the queue a bit, which is very German. Before I introduce you as our key speaker, allow me to introduce myself a bit further. I'm usually presenting at German National Public Radio Deutschlandfunk, where I've been working in the educational department for ages, for many, many years. And now I'm working as an editor and presenter of economic issues. The UK and its leaving the European Union are very close to my heart, as I witnessed the unfolding from within, living in London from 15 until last year. And I feel very honored to host this panel. And now, Vivienne Stern, I'm very honored to introduce you. You have 20 years of experience of working in higher education policy at national and international level. You are presently very busy being the director of Universities UK International. Prior to this, you worked at Universities UK as head of political affairs. You are a member of several boards and advisory committees. Vivienne, I should mention as well that you graduated from the University of Oxford in English literature. Not sure whether you bumped into Sally there. You are anyways a keen learner, as you told me before. You're currently brushing up your French, as you always feel, you told me, slightly embarrassed about the generalized British assumption that foreign languages are highly overrated. So without further ado, let's move straight on to what you have to bring, Vivienne. I look very much forward to your kicking off our expert panel.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I should say Oxford can claim no credit for my my academic career. I was at Cambridge and sorry. I don't know why I feel I have to mention that. Perhaps I don't. I think to start with, the comment that you made about where we are in the saga that is Brexit. And you said perhaps we'd got to the point of acceptance, and I'm not sure from my own perspective that we're quite at that point yet. I think that we are all, both in the UK and across Europe, adjusting to a new reality and trying to work out what it means. In the UK, I think there's still a bit of anger within the higher education community about the nature of the relationship and the way that it has changed. But I think for those of us in the policy sphere, or at least certainly I can speak for myself, having reached the point at which the separation from the European Union has been concluded, it seems to us that now's the time to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and stop talking about all the things that could have been or would have been, and start to make what we can of the new basis for cooperation. I think the second thing I would say is that in a separation between the UK and the EU, which to many of us involved in the debate over a number of years was a more clear-cut and perhaps drastic separation than some of us imagined at the outset of the debate, higher education and research has been protected, relatively speaking. And I think that's non-trivial. I think that during the course of the debates in the UK, it became widely understood that it is absolutely in the UK's national interest that we should continue to collaborate with great universities across the continent of Europe in research, in higher education and in student exchange. I think particularly it has been appreciated that the relationship between the UK and Germany is special and important, and that there is something which we need to not only try to preserve about the nature of that collaboration, but also look to increase in the future as the UK increases the proportion of GDP invested in research, and as the UK looks to enhance the international character of its universities. And in that context, I think that although we as Universities UK regretted the decision to leave the European Union, we regret the fact that the UK wasn't able to negotiate a membership of the Erasmus programme. We are nonetheless relatively positive about the basis for which we have to cooperate with German universities and universities in other parts of the continent in the future. I think it was significant that on the day that the trade and cooperation agreement was announced by the Prime Minister, I mean, I vividly remember it because it was Christmas Eve and I was making mince pies. I was covered from head to toe in flour and butter and sugar, trying to tweet simultaneously about the terms of the TCA. The Prime Minister, on the day that the Trade and Cooperation agreement was concluded, announced that the UK would create a new scheme called Turing. And the intention is to make sure that, although we're not going to be part of the Erasmus programme, we sustain the two-way flow of our students between universities in the UK and universities in other parts of the world, including in Europe. And of course, there are features of Turing which cannot replicate the benefits of Erasmus. There are elements of the Erasmus programme which are not replicated in Turing, including staff exchange and strategic cooperation. But nonetheless, it provides UK universities with access to funding which will allow them to not only maintain outward student mobility, but I hope increase it. And I say that because, in fact, on this score, the UK has performed really very poorly. We have historically sent very small numbers of UK students to spend time studying or working in other countries, and I think our education system is the poorer for it. I should say that's not true of every university, and I think we should pay tribute to those universities that have invested their own resources, as well as making the most of the Erasmus scheme in order to support outbound mobility. But we now have a platform which I hope will enable us to increase the enthusiasm of our own students for experiencing life and study and work in other countries. And whilst there are features of the Turing scheme which are difficult, I just want to put two things to bed. One is there's a lot of doubt about how the Turing scheme will interrelate with the Erasmus scheme and with other national funding pots to support mobility. But I think this is born of a sort of, in a sense, a little bit of a tunnel vision when it comes to discussion about the UK and Europe. I think that we just have to move our mental furniture and accept that the UK has become a little bit more like the US or Canada or Japan. We have, like many other countries, now got to work out how to make the funding that's available in our system work with funding that's available in other national systems. And just as the DAAD supports students to spend time in non-European systems outside of Erasmus, we would hope that over time it's possible for funding agencies such as the DAAD and others across Europe to recalibrate the structures they've got in place to support non-European mobility outside of Erasmus, to think of us as not this unfamiliar, strange new beastie, but really just something which is familiar, but from a different set of experiences. On the UK side, there is a lot of uncertainty over the question of fee waivers. But if you look at any institution which is exchanging students with counterpart universities outside the EU or outside of the Erasmus programme, it's important to underline the fact that fee waivers are a normal part of reciprocal exchange agreements, and that we know that right at this very moment, our universities are in touch with established and in some cases new exchange partners to try to craft the legal basis for reciprocal exchange agreements based on the principle of fee waiver. And that means that the funding gap, if you like, the ask that we're going to be making of either individual universities or national funding agencies is really just about the living costs, the support for those students whilst they are studying, not about paying fees. Now, even there, I hope that the Erasmus programme will continue to be part of the landscape as we're trying to make sure that, as you said, we don't close off opportunities for German students to spend time in UK universities. There is an unanswered question at this point about whether the Commission will be flexible in the way that it allows the little pot of money that is put aside within Key Action 103 to support student exchange to countries outside of the Erasmus programme, and whether they will allow some of that funding to be used to support mobility to the UK. And I think we all in the UK understand that this is a trial year. We need to see how this goes, and we will, of course, be looking at the experiences of our counterpart institutions in Germany and elsewhere, and using what we can learn from those experiences of our universities trying to work within this new framework with their counterparts to inform future iterations of the programme. Perhaps before ending my remarks, I'd just like to make one other point. The biggest, if you like, battleground in the Brexit debate from our point of view in the UK was about our access to the Horizon programme. We argued throughout the period in which Brexit was a hot political topic that Horizon Europe is an irreplaceable framework for cooperation. There is nothing like it in the world. And it is beneficial to us, it's beneficial to those counterparts who work with our institutions through the framework provided by Horizon. And actually it's an indispensable foundation for international collaboration, not just collaboration within Europe. The fact that the UK did secure an association to Horizon, I think, is really significant. It will require a net transfer of money from the UK to the EU. We are completely clear that the UK will win less from that than we contribute. And we're nonetheless very enthusiastic about it. And so the message that I try and leave with those people who are watching this session today is use it, because that framework is there. However much hurt and pain and confusion has been caused by the last couple of years' debate, now's the time to start putting together proposals with colleagues in UK universities and making bids to the Horizon Europe programme. Although our association hasn't been finalised, I'm assured that it will happen and that it will be a fairly seamless process. So I think start planning now, bid together, because I think from our point of view, we have to tell people, use it or lose it. In 7 years' time, when we come to renegotiating our access, we want to be able to show that this has been great for both sides. And that will only be possible if we're able to show the enthusiasm for the programme has been matched by the action of our academics, bidding together and then doing great work within it. And perhaps in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Vivienne. There was a lot of food for thought in there. Maybe we start off with Horizon, because it seems to me the less complicated matter, because it's still in place. But let me pass this on to you, Eva Maria, because I think you made your points. Let's use it or lose it. It sounds as if both sides could, for the moment, be fairly relaxed about Horizon, although we don't know how it's going to play out. Are you relaxed about it, Eva?
Not quite. Intrigued and happy to see it continue at this point. And we'll certainly be highly engaged, or try to have our faculty highly engaged in that. What is certainly important for us is the learning that tells us that collaboration has to change and has to maybe be more focused on individual partnerships and strategic partnerships between institutions, and not the full range of what we were used to in terms of opportunities, especially for our students. So if we ask our faculty, or if we urge our faculty to even more engage into Horizon programs, that would mean there is also the hope behind that there is strong institutional partnerships emerging from that, and that the research collaboration kind of is trickling down the stages. So it's graduate students benefiting, of course, and in its next step, it's master students benefiting, and its next step is undergraduate students benefiting, because faculty moves closer together, and that's kind of a strategy which we see, of course, as very successful also in already existing strong strategic partnerships. For most part, they also came about that way.
So what you're stressing, Eva, it's the bilateral collaboration that you are emphasizing now. And I'm just wondering, to pass this on to Sally maybe, it's not clear whether the UK is going to lose out on this potentially, because we cannot see yet whether travel projects and research projects are going to be upheld as they were before. What's your view on this, Sally?
Because it's really hard to reconstruct those kind of relationships in a different context. So the fact that the UK retains a relationship with Horizon Europe is something that we see as very positive. And I would completely agree with Vivienne that use it or lose it has to be the mentality. I think we've got to appreciate that academic colleagues have gone through several years of real uncertainty, however, about what the nature of the relationship was going to be. And that has undoubtedly demoralized people and made them possibly slightly less willing to go to the trouble of putting in really elaborate research applications. We have to build up that appetite again. And I think it will be really important to see the kind of relationships that we've seen in the past be strengthened and be further developed. Science often exists in terms of relationships built at departmental level. But I can see that what Eva is saying is that the bilateral arrangements are also going to need to be very important. And Vivienne made that point too. And I think you will find that many UK universities, my own included, are seeking to build really visible partnerships with complementary institutions in Germany, so as really to reinforce the importance of those relationships as we go forward.
Maybe we leave it there because we have a lot of input from the public, bouncing off from what you said about Turing, because I think it's an important question. Can Turing, being designed as an outbound program, really make up for the loss of Erasmus? I think we all agree it cannot. But is there, and this is the most prominent question that has been put by Beate Maleska, from the Hochschule of Esslingen, can the Turing scheme, or the Turing scheme is an excellent perspective, she writes, are there any funds possibly in mind for German outgoing students to the UK? I wonder whether you, Vivienne, could answer this. Possibly you are the best position.
Well, so there's a sort of slightly complicated answer to this. So within the 4 nations of the UK, both Wales and Northern Ireland now have slightly different arrangements on top of Turing. So that I'll just start by describing those. In Northern Ireland, we expect the government of the Republic of Ireland has said that it would like to arrange for students from Northern Irish universities to continue to be able to access the Erasmus programme via institutions in the Republic of Ireland. And so I imagine there will still be a possibility of Erasmus exchange with Northern Irish institutions on that basis, although the details haven't been worked out. In Wales, on Sunday, the Welsh Assembly Government announced a bolt-on scheme, an additional scheme, which will sit on top or alongside Turing, which will have a very small pocket of funding to pay for inbound mobility. And then the next level up, there is still funding available through the last Erasmus programme, which will continue to be in the system until about 2023. So some German students coming from German institutions who still have Erasmus funding from the last programme will be able to access that. And then finally, as I say, there's a budget envelope within the new programme in Key Action 103 that could be used to fund mobility from Germany to the UK if the Commission allows it, and we're waiting to see what the Commission will decide on that.
Thank you. On the back of that, I think Turing, and from what I heard, Turing has been hugely criticized for a lot of reasons. It's clearly meant to take away the focus from Europe somehow along the lines of our reach is global, and universities and education might potentially buffer up foreign policy. Students are going to deepen relationships with Asia, with China. So whatever seems to be useful in the middle term. What's your take on that, Nick?
Well, thank you. It's a very good question because, of course, we're all still getting to grips both with the details of the Turing scheme, which have only been very recently published, and then the detail of these add-on schemes, such as the Welsh one that's only literally just been announced, almost only hours ago. As we're the organisation I run, the Higher Education Policy Institute, we're a charity, so we don't take a particular stance on these issues, and we've published pieces on our website that look at all the positives of the Turing scheme, including one by Viv, and we've published pieces that probe all sorts of very challenging and difficult questions about the Turing scheme. But one positive about it is that, of course, we have been very bad at outward mobility as a country in the past, much less good than in Germany, for example, where there's been very clear government commitments to outward mobility for German students, whereas we've been very bad at that. We've given access, if you like, to UK students to cultures around the world, almost by having international campuses in the UK, which is no real match for that. And the biggest hindrance, or one of the really big things that I worry about, is, of course, the positives of Erasmus in terms of language learning. We are, and you already hinted at it in your chairing, we are by far and away the worst within the, well, we're no longer in the EU, but when we were in the EU, we're by far and away the worst in the EU for young people being able to speak a second language, for example. We're half as bad as Hungary, and Hungary was second worst. So, you know, and I do worry that Turing might make it easier for someone to go and study in Australia, let's say, or Canada, which would be fantastic in all sorts of ways, but it won't bring back some of the language benefits that some of the positive aspects of the Erasmus scheme have allowed. So as I say, look at it in a positive way, in the sense that it lets British people go out and experience different cultures with more impetus maybe than sometimes in the past, though imperfectly. And the funding's only confirmed for 1 year. So our entire conversation about Turing is only really about the first year of Turing. We don't actually know what happens after that. But one of the really big negatives I worry about, staffing is one, but another is what it means for our already dire ability to speak second, third, fourth languages.
You were talking about the downsides of it, or the potential risks involved, because it's only meant to be short term and has to be renegotiated. One of the upsides I was seeing was that it could have the potential to encourage students from disadvantaged backgrounds to go abroad, because it's supporting shorter stays, 2 week stays, 3 week stays, 4 week stays. Or is this just a fake? Is this just a way of trying to sell it?
Well, no, I think the government does have a genuine commitment to doing that. And of course, one fair challenge to Erasmus to date is that, or at least one caricature of Erasmus to date, is that it has particularly benefited students who are already pretty advantaged. And so I do not doubt the government's commitment to getting people from more disadvantaged backgrounds through the scheme. But there's a huge difference between having a commitment to do that and it actually happening. And so, you know, implementation will really matter here. The size and scale and scope of the program will matter. Which universities choose to play ball with the scheme in a really significant way will matter. The detailed implementation of whose applications are successful and whose aren't will matter. The future funding envelope for the scheme will matter. So I actually don't doubt the government's commitment on that, but just because the government says that doesn't automatically mean we'll see a much more diverse group of students benefit from it than those who have benefited from Erasmus in the past.
Thank you. Coming back to German students, which might be precluded to some extent from participating. Eva Maria, I'd like to address this to you. Shouldn't German universities be more open to this concept of short-term stays as well, now that they're going to lose out on a lot of reciprocity in terms of Erasmus?
I very much do think so, that German universities should concentrate on short-term, on providing short-term, low-threshold opportunities, especially in Bremen. I mean, we have a high proportion of students from a disadvantaged background, from a non-academic background. And for them to take up university studies was already the big step in life. And now, within just a year or so, they are asked to go abroad for a whole term, or for a whole semester, for a whole year. For many of them, that's just too much to ask, one after the other. Whereas, and here the pandemic actually gives us a tremendous boost. So with all the digital means, we have the opportunity to offer, say, hybrid experiences of mobility. Say a student has the opportunity to work in a joint classroom with students from other countries. They work on joint projects, and let's hope after a while, after travel is possible again, they will have a chance to meet in, say, a 2-week, 3-week, 4-week activity. And I think that will steer a lot of interest. That will steer a lot of positive ideas of what it might mean to go abroad for longer term. And I think we should pay attention to this intermediate step more than we maybe did before with Erasmus at hand for especially the UK exchange. But that came in semester increments.
Thank you. I keep an eye on Slido, and actually the next prominent question that's popping up again and again and has been voted up by 25 people is from Sandra Conrad-Hughes, who's asking, or I think this is addressed to the DAAD, does DAAD plan to find a solution with UK like with Switzerland in terms of exchange and cooperation? Ruud, you might be able to answer from your point of view, or you might pass it on to Mr. Mukherjee.
Well, thanks for the question. Maybe if you could clarify on what aspect. I mean, we already have a really wide variety and range of funding and corporations. So if there's more clarification on the question, maybe?
There isn't, not as far as I can see, because it only gives you the opportunity for a very short line. So
okay,
if we could come back to Sandra, she might be more precise, but she can't.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe we go to Kai Schiller from Durham University. What would the interest of a UK university be to offer a waiver? So we come back to the crucial point of waivers. If the fees are so much higher in the UK. And I think maybe Sally, you could answer this. You swapped to putting international fees on European students now, as you are expected to, and they're happy to pay because you're quite an excellent university. But what about the others?
Kai raises a very fair question. So it tends to be the situation now that many universities will be charging international level fees, and those fees, as everybody knows, can be quite substantial. Frankly, I think the answer to this is that universities will necessarily respond individually. I'm very conscious that a number of universities will be strongly incentivized to offer fee waivers or fee reductions because they value the presence of European Union students, including students from Germany, so strongly. Others will not be in a position to be able to make those arrangements, or they will make them on a bilateral basis where they've got a good relationship with a partner university in Germany. I think it will vary from institution to institution, depending on how that institution is set up. And that, if you like, may be one of the aspects of fallout from Brexit, that there will be a bit of divergence in practice. But it's a diverse sector with different ways of doing business. What seems to me to be a key point in this, however, is the one that colleagues have made across the piece, which is that these exchange opportunities are incredibly valuable to students and valuable to institutions, both in Germany and in the UK. So we will be strongly incentivized, I think, to find ways to make this work where we can. But I don't think you're going to find a one-size-fits-all approach.
Mm-hmm. So you're quite optimistic about top-tier universities waiving fees as they're not relying on them?
As I say, I think that they will be incentivized to do so. I'm not in a position to offer any kind of guarantee. I think, frankly, that we'll all be looking at this on an individual, often case-by-case basis to see where we can do it and if we can do it. I think one of the things that perhaps we have to remember is that there's a huge amount of volatility in the sector at the moment, including for UK institutions on the funding front, as a result of the pandemic, and that makes it rather hard to give guarantees about funding arrangements at the moment.
Maybe on the back of that, I'd like to ask you, Vivienne, because one further question is, realistically, from your professional opinion, what is the chance of universities agreeing to waiver tuition as you suggest?
Well, I think it will happen for two reasons. One is that the Turing scheme itself won't fund fee payments for outbound students, which means that if I'm sending a student to another university, I won't have the funding available to support tuition fee costs for them at the receiving institution. So there is an incentive for me to agree with the receiving institution a reciprocal fee waiver. So that's one reason why I think you'll find that there are lots of those inter-institutional agreements that are concluded on the basis of reciprocal fee waiver. And the second reason is that it's simply the basis for the majority of exchange that happens outside of the Erasmus programme. One thing we didn't tell our politicians very much during the debate around Erasmus Association was that half of UK outbound mobility is already non-Erasmus. So a lot of the mobility that happens from the UK, and as Nick has said, it's a very small proportion of our students who go abroad, a lot of that is happening either on a self-funded basis or institutionally funded. So universities putting their own funding in to support outbound mobility. Now, some of that involves payment of fees for the receiving institutions. For example, I'm told that it's quite hard to get top tier US institutions to agree with reciprocal fee waivers. I'm told that's very hard to secure. I'm also aware that summer schools quite often operate on the basis of a fee. And so it is not the case that it is universally true that all exchange is based on fee waiver, but a large proportion of non-Erasmus exchange has always been based on that sort of reciprocal fee waiver concept. So I'm relatively confident that those interinstitutional agreements will provide mobility on the basis of fee waiver. I also think it's important to make a really clear distinction between non-degree mobility. So people who are, they're registered with a German institution and they're coming to spend a semester or a short period of time in a UK university, and full degree mobility. And there, as Sally has said, the terrain has changed, and European students who come to do full degrees in the UK will be subject to international fees. And the question will be, what do individual institutions do about the sort of flexibility they have around the edges to support the cost of those for students who otherwise might not be able to take advantage of that. Now, I think my message to anybody who's trying to advise a student who's considering full degree mobility to the UK is you need to really do your homework, because you are also becoming more like a student that we might receive from Mexico or South Korea. And universities have scholarship policies, they have financial support packages in some cases. In other cases, those are very limited. It's not like the US, where the kind of financial support available to applicants is, a very, very well established part of the system. But it is becoming more like that. And so I would simply say to anybody who's considering studying in the UK and thinks it may have just become too expensive for them, they need to look a little bit below the headlines. First of all, course fees vary by degree, by course, by provider, and by level. And also you have to start asking the question, could there be any financial support available through scholarships or bursaries or other forms of financial support?
As I'm very well aware that a lot of people are watching us and listening to us who are responsible on a university level to make this work, I would very much like to discuss whether universities are prepared. From what I gathered from what all of you said, was that it all comes down to tailor-made cooperation, bilateral tailor-made cooperation, which in the end means it will be much more labor intensive, not only for the individual student who is knocking on doors and trying to work out where he could apply and which money he has to pay. But on a bilateral level, it seems to me that this is coming down to a lot of work. Maybe, Eva, from your point of view, as you are involved in making this work, how do you see it?
Indeed. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of additional work, and you just feel you have to reinvent the wheel because it was out there already in the big programs, and now you start to kind of knit your own one. But it makes there's an enormous benefit there also. We can, in the end, I hope we can offer much more tailor-made opportunities for our students. We can offer opportunities that are much more intrinsically backed by our faculty, because it's not in a big frame. It's in one subject area. It is because research interests are kind of on the same wavelengths. And I think that in this way there's a strong benefit there as well. It becomes more specialized. It becomes more tailor-made. It becomes certainly, you can say, in a way, more narrow, but also more intense and more to the topic. We see this in the collaboration that we're about to establish with Cardiff University. That's one of our big projects in this moment. And of course, you can say it will never cover the whole range of subjects field at the university as the big programs could. But those which are covered, there is a completely different intensity in it. And this intensity really benefits student careers and careers of young scientists very, very much. And that's a strong benefit that we can work on.
Nick, maybe linking into what you said, Eva, when we talk to academic staff at UK universities, most of them are very Europhile. They want to make this work. But UK universities are businesses. They need to attract people who are paying, and those who are paying international fees. Are we under the illusion when we make ourselves believe that UK universities will want to attract European, German students at the expense of, let's say, Indian, Chinese ones? Is the argument that universities want to maintain university by attracting European students, is it a valid one?
Yes, it is valid, because our universities, like universities all over the world by and large, want to see national boundaries broken down. They're not entirely globalist institutions, but they do believe that research and cultural exchange and education are more effective when boundaries are broken down, whether that's more diverse lecture halls or more diverse research groups or more diverse teaching staff. And so I don't recognize the caricature of more Germans or more Indians, because actually, in an ideal world, you would take both and some more home students as well, and be bigger, better, and more successful. And clearly, when it comes to the finances, there's some very interesting questions there that you've already delved into. I mean, one alternative, I'm not suggesting everybody listening in would favour this, but one alternative to lots of fee waivers are actually charging the higher fees that have already been referred to, and using some of the surplus for agents and others to find potential and prospective students, because that you referred to China and India. That is how a lot of Chinese and Indian students are found. There are challenges in that, because of course the higher the fee, the less diverse in terms of socioeconomic background the sorts of students we're talking about are. But I note in passing, for example, that there are very significant numbers of Germans at some of our leading independent schools with very high fees. I mean, one other thing I'd like to say, just while I've got the microphone, I mean, when you said at the beginning that we were maybe in the final of the 7 stages of grief, of acceptance, I mean, sometimes the final stage is called hope. And I think it's, I mean, just my personal view, not a view for my organisation or anybody else. I think it's very unlikely the UK would seek to rejoin the EU in the foreseeable future. I don't think it's as unlikely that the UK might seek to rejoin Erasmus in the foreseeable future. You know, the Brexiteers in the UK, they weren't campaigning for the UK to leave Erasmus. And in fact, the British government, until pretty late on in the Brexit post-referendum negotiations, wanted to remain within Erasmus. But the rumour, well, more than a rumour, the Minister for Universities has said on the record that the price tag put on that was £600 million a year. It's a bit hard to get under the skin of where that number comes from. But it was a decision around the finances of continued participation, as far as I understand it, and rather than anything else. And the Turing scheme has, of course, been set up initially with only 1 year of funding. So maybe I'm being hopelessly naive, but you know, really fruitful. There might just be grounds of hope for a more fruitful conversation about a bigger, bolder approach in the medium term.
I'm really interested in how you pass this on to the Chancellor. It seems to be in a difficult situation right now, but I appreciate your optimistic tone in it. Sally, St Andrews, we talked about it, is charging overseas fees now, has become more expensive for German students. What would incentivize you to take on more German students?
It's not just a question about the fees, far from it. It's about the culturally diverse nature of an institution, frankly. And, you know, my own institution, we have students and staff from over 140 different countries, and we hugely value that amazingly diverse combination in 1 square mile of northeast Fife in Scotland. It's quite an extraordinary mix. So you have to remember, you know, you often hear the mantra that universities are businesses, but actually universities are really places that are about the adventure that is education, and they're about giving students that extraordinary cultural mix. It's also about reinforcing the relationships that, for us, you know, my university was founded in 1413. Some of its founders had been directly educated at the University of Cologne. These relationships with Germany go back a very long way, and those lengthy relationships really count for something. They mean something. They have generated the kind of phenomenon that we've seen today of a whole stack of people on this call who have degrees in English literature. So we're also talking about the cultural importance that many UK universities place great emphasis on, of having a kind of rich cultural mix. So our policy is really very much to try to make ourselves as open as possible to, as Vivienne was indicating, utilise fee waivers where we're in a position to do so, but also, as Eva Maria was saying, to build up, and I think you'll see a lot more of this post-pandemic, to build up the sustained partnership relations with institutions with which one feels one has a good deal in common, so that you can build relationships at a number of levels. My own university has a partnership relationship with the University of Bonn, and that's about research exchange, it's about student exchange, it's about coach-tutel degrees. It's also about HR projects, diversity projects. I think that in the post-pandemic world, where we're all looking hard at our priorities, we'll see far more of these far-reaching, deep, sustained partnership relationships between universities and institutions that will rather change the nature of the dynamic, and in my view, will often change it for the better.
Sorry, there was somebody who wanted to answer directly on the back of this? No. Let me bring in, just to counter that, Jean Schleiss from the LMU Munich, who writes that a UK partner has already indicated that their focus will not be on Europe when applying for Turing funding. Will this become a trend amongst UK universities? And I think here we're back to Vivienne.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that this year and next year may be different from future years because there's still Erasmus money in the UK, which can be used to support mobility to European partner institutions. So this year will be different. The other thing is that the Turing scheme was launched. It was announced at the end of December. The call for proposals opened a couple of weeks ago. The deadline is about a week and a half from now. The whole thing has been done in a tearing hurry. And anybody who's been involved in coordinating student exchange knows that that timeline doesn't work at all for student exchange. So we know, and I think to be fair, the government understands this too, that year one is going to be very different from year 5. Because to be honest, what's going to happen is that in year 1, universities will look to do things that they couldn't do via Erasmus, because they've still got some funding from Erasmus in many cases, or things that were already in train. Now, in year 5, will there be, I mean, notwithstanding Nick's point about we don't have the money for year 5 yet, but if we see this as an established scheme, in the future, what will the balance be? That's down to us. It's down to us. The Turing scheme is designed to support our students to go wherever they choose and wherever the universities decide they want to support mobility. So it is really down to universities and to students themselves to make the decision between Germany as a destination and South Korea. And I think that takes it back a little bit to where Sally was sort of the theme Sally picked up, which is the educational opportunity in German institutions. Why is it that should be a draw for our students? Nick's point about the advantage of going to a country where you have an opportunity to develop new language skills, particularly, I think, global language skills, and I would regard German as a global language. And then I suppose thirdly, it seems to me that Turing is an opportunity because it supports mobility at a number of different academic levels, also to begin to sow the seeds of research collaboration. And one thing that I would like to try and draw people's attention to is the fact that the Turing scheme could support very short periods of mobility, both at the PhD level, but also because it supports mobility for recent graduates, for those people who have just completed a PhD and could spend some time, for example, in a German lab or a research setting, beginning to lay the foundations for future collaboration. And so I guess I know that it sounds as though I'm a very glass half full person, right? But I would say there are some new opportunities here, and it's really down to us. It's about how hard we work, how hard counterpart institutions on the German side work, and whether we can get over all the hurt and bitterness and try and craft out a good opportunity here. Because it's really up to us, and it's up to us to persuade our students that coming to Germany is a great choice.
Considering myself as being a glass half full person too, let me take on the part of being the glass half empty person now. I was wondering, Eva, it's all well and right, but let's swap perspective again and let's look from a German point of view. It's all well and nice to have an optional year or an optional trimester in the UK, but what about students who are going to need this as part of their qualification, as part of their curriculum? Let's say language students. There are going to be fewer exchanges with the UK as reciprocity is not guaranteed. Are a lot of them bound to miss out in 2 years' time?
We're struggling with this phenomenon, actually. We have a number of study lines which require mandatory stay abroad in an English-speaking country, and you can guess what the number one destination was, and it's kind of hard to fill this now. And the faculty is struggling to either change for the rules, which they don't want to, because there's of course the idea behind that the actual living experience in an English-speaking country is crucial. And plan B, to replace this by hybrid formats, semi-digital formats, replace it by going to follow English language or English language classes in a non-English speaking country. I mean, all these variations are out there, but of course what they want is to maintain what they have, and that I mean, again, points to the only way out I see is to work on a close collaboration with, say, bilaterally with partner universities would make that possible. And of course, that raises the question, what do we as a German university have to offer to those institutions whom we address? And we have to come up with very innovative formats here. And that's a challenge, but that's also a great opportunity.
And it's still very early days, so we're discussing at a point where it's all on the table, but it has to percolate a bit. I'd like to come back to the chat forum, because I suppose, or from what I gather, a lot of people are interested in how this is going to work on a very practical level. So Nick, could you be so nice as to give us the basic points of Erasmus Plus in contrast to Turing? What is similar, what is different, is a question that has been asked a few times. Any aspects German universities should be aware of?
Well, I genuinely think you'll be better off putting that question to Viv, but I would just say a couple of
Didn't want to overstretch her.
Before you do so. I mean, there are some useful resources floating around online. There was one table I've got in front of me here, which compares Erasmus Plus both to Turing and to the Welsh announcement over the weekend. So there are differences. We've talked about inward mobility. We've talked about the staffing aspects to it, for example, which are two I would particularly flag. Also, the time-limited nature of it. I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, but we only have a year's funding, and we have what's called a comprehensive spending review. I'm not sure what the German equivalent is, but later this year, which will determine all sorts of things to do with how much every part of our education system gets over the next few years. Plus, of course, the UK over time increasingly looks a little bit more like Germany in terms of the devolution of power. And you've heard how Northern Ireland and Wales have different systems. Sally might want to talk about, Scotland. There's a big campaign in Scotland to let Scotland as Scotland rather than as an integral part of the UK join Erasmus, which I don't think will go anywhere. But nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make is it's a moving picture, and it depends which part of the UK you're talking about. And it depends, even within each part of the UK, what type of university you're talking about. Because the other answer to the question, institutions focus, for example, on EU countries versus the other part of the world, will depend actually on which British university you're talking about. They will, we have a diverse higher education sector, and in some ways it's becoming more diverse. It's certainly more diverse than the German one. I wrote a couple of years ago a comparison of the German and UK HE systems, which is on our website, and people may find a value. But for the real technical detail, I would defer to Viv.
Thank you very much. Looking at or including more questions, I'd like to come back to the imbalance between how keen Europeans, Germans especially, are how keen they are to study in the UK, and how little UK students are drawn to parts of Europe, except from Spain. Excuse this being a bit. No, but what I would like to put to you, Ruud, is what advice would you give universities who are going to knock on your door, being faced with this asymmetry?
Thank you. You're talking about UK universities knocking on our doors, or rather German?
I think the German universities are going to knock to your doors because they want to send people over. Yeah, I mean, I think really there's nothing much to add to all the speakers so far, because from all my discussions with partner universities, we have a really strong
partner universities, I can say that exactly this is true. They're all talking about intensifying relationships, about looking for strategic partners rather than more general cooperations. So the DAAD, as you probably know, when we have the big conference in summer, these are the questions the universities had put, where how do we move forward? And I would always give the advice that look into your partnerships and be realistic. I mean, this has been said before as well. I think there might be some disruptions and there might be maybe a decrease in quantity, but it is really the time to focus and look for strategic partners. We are happy to help. We have some more seminars coming up. And I think it is really a more focused partnership that lots of universities are looking into. And from what I heard, a lot of universities, German universities, they have already started negotiating with their British partner universities about like a new form of university cooperation post Erasmus, because I mean they need time to negotiate for new collaboration agreements. So a lot of them have already started, as far as I can say.
Thank you. I'd just like to come back shortly to what I mentioned in my short introduction, that pandemic has dominated Brexit, or Brexit has taken for a while a backseat now, and suddenly it's popping up again. It's not a big surprise, but it has been put in perspective to some extent. When do you think it will percolate to a lot of universities that this is to be a major change in their relationships? Sally, is this going to be a transition period that's going to last for 2 years? Do we have plenty of time, in your opinion?
I think it's a really good question, Sandra. I think many universities, like my own, will have started their Brexit preparation planning in 2016. So we worked through all the issues that we thought we were going to have to deal with in terms of student exchange, immigration, research, supply chain issues. We had all of that. I mean, I can't say it was the most uplifting set of issues to work through, but we dutifully worked through them over a 3-year period, really trying to get things organised for when Brexit came. Of course, for the past year, that's been amazingly disrupted by the pandemic, and the pandemic has had the curious effect of pushing Brexit down the pecking order, so that it's become the second thing one thinks about after COVID. All that said, and to go to the heart of your question, I think most universities are coping at the moment, but that is primarily because there isn't a great deal of travel taking place. And so the real impact of Brexit in terms of both short-term mobility and then longer-term staff and student mobility is something that we can't quite judge yet. We have to look at recruitment in terms of staff recruitment, academic and professional staff. We also, as we've been discussing, have to look at student recruitment, and we have to look at how relatively easy or not, and Professor Mukherjee was hinting at this at the start, issues to do with immigration and visas turn out to be as travel opens up. So I think the answer to that is we've at the moment, we're in this kind of almost a sort of Brexit limbo, where we're all managing, but we don't quite know what the new normal is going to feel like. But as we emerge from the pandemic and into the post-Brexit era, over, I would say, the next 9 months to the year, we'll have a much clearer sense of the extent and the nature of the impact.
Thank you, Sally. And I imagine the same goes for researchers' mobility, because there has been a question about young researchers' mobility and how it's going to be impacted. I wonder, Eva, maybe you could contribute to this young researchers' mobility. I mean, it's basically they stayed at home or stayed where they were. So how is this going to work out in the medium perspective?
Well, for now, of course, we're making. I mean, everything is on hold as it comes to in particular short-term mobility. But let me just mention one other issue, which is very much high up on our agenda. It's the European University Initiative. We do have a UK partner, the University of Essex, and I may say Bremen and Essex are very much at the center of this initiative. We're driving a lot together, and of course we're devoting a lot of planning or strategic thinking to what the new normal might mean to our early career researchers. So we are trying to come up with formats, mobility formats for within postdoc schemes. We're trying to come up with training opportunities now with a new and quite unforeseen mix of digital and hopefully soon also physical presence. There's a lot of new formats to be explored here, and again, a lot of challenges ahead. So I would think that this what might seem an unfortunate coincidence of the pandemic and the Brexit taking our attention from each other in one way or another, maybe it's also a fortunate coincidence to have it happen alongside, because it opens up completely new doors.
Thank you for your positivity. Thank you.
The half-full glass. I can't help it.
Glass. Vivienne, you're a half-full glass woman too. And might I just pass this on to you, because it is a question that has been coming up again and again. And before we are about to draw a line, how can fee waiver concepts be extended to places like Germany where people don't pay fees in the first place? We're coming back to the fee waiver question.
Well, it's rather simple from the German perspective. I mean, this is precisely the problem when UK universities are trying to agree fee waivers with US institutions, that the asymmetry works very badly in that case. With Germany, it's really, I think, not effectively a problem. It's a question for UK institutions, whether they on their side can agree that this is a reciprocal agreement. Of course, that's not true right across Europe, but it does make things rather simpler from the German perspective, especially if the foregone fee income isn't made up in some systems when institutions waive fees from other sources. I think a critical question on the UK front is whether that subsidy from the UK government to UK institutions who waive fees will be maintained, because that is quite critical in supporting the finances of it. But yeah, I mean, look, the next year will tell us whether I'm wrong to be optimistic that the bulk of exchange agreements between UK and German institutions will be conducted on the basis of fee waiver. Now, if in 6 months' time it turns out that no exchange agreements have been concluded, or that this has been the deal breaker when institutions sat and talked to each other, I will happily come back and ceremonially eat a hat. But my real expectation is that is not the story that we have to tell in 6 months' time. But we will see.
We're looking forward to this, I think. And Nick, this might be the last question we're going to be able to answer. And I think it's slightly more political. That's why I put it to you. Birgit Smith is asking, Erasmus Plus also covered teaching exchanges. Turing doesn't. Is UK going to make funding available for reciprocal exchanges for lecturers? Oh, he might have disappeared. Sally, jump in, please.
Sorry, my microphone was off. And maybe Sally was keen to answer it, but I haven't seen any evidence for that at all to date. Equally, policies constantly evolve, and although politicians are not always as responsive as their stakeholders might like, they do listen to what they are told. So I haven't seen any evidence of that to date, but I think it would be wrong to think the Turing scheme is a scheme that's in aspic that will never change. It would have to make very persuasive arguments, I think, for it to be extended to staff. But of course, the international dimension of university staff in the UK are part of what makes our sector so fantastically strong. And just as I think this is my last comment, I'm also a glass half full person. And I do think Sally's point that a lot of the UK German links predate the existence of the EU, and they will postdate the UK's membership of the EU. And I think it's important that we don't underestimate the goodwill in British universities for maintaining those relationships with what has been our single most important European partner. And thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you. Sally, on the back of that, would you like to add something?
Certainly, I do think that Nick. I always wonder when Nick gives us these mini revelations, whether he knows more than he's actually telling us. But I do think it's likely to be the case that Turing should and can evolve, and it's up to us to try to influence it and indicate the areas where we feel it needs to change over time. The UK government are very, very keen on making Turing a success. That gives us the opportunity to indicate those ways in which it may well need to be enhanced. And we will do that because apart from anything else, as has been indicated, our relationship with our German partners is incredibly important to UK universities, and we need to make this work as effectively as we can. Thank you also for inviting me today.
Thank you very much. And as I'm a radio person, I'm supposed to be in time, but I'm slightly running over. But just to mention that one question here was if it would be possible to get a brief summary of the outcome of our discussion so that people could discuss it later in their own teams. I think that's the plan. I'm not quite sure, but we work hard to make it possible to get you something that you can work with. We're approaching the end of the expert talk today. I would like to thank you all my panelists. Eva Maria Feichtner, Vice President International and Diversity from the University of Bremen, Nick Hillman, Director of the Higher Policy Institute, Ruud Krahe, Head of DAAD London, Sally Mapstone, Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, and last but not least, Vivienne Stern, Directors of Universities UK International. Thank you all for being here, for making this discussion so vivid and giving us a taste of how the glass might be half full and not half empty. It's early days. We'll see how it will transpire. We got a few valuable clues. We will see what the obstacles are. Last but not least, let me thank Jaiprato Mukherjee here, Director of the DAAD and host of this expert talk, and his wonderful team, which you weren't able to see here behind the scenes. They did a lot of valuable work here. Last but not least, I have to thank you, our listeners, for your very involved and knowledgeable comments on this and questions. From what I gather, you are, among others, the ones that will have to make this work on a very practical level to put in place the best possible substitute for Erasmus Plus and the best possible bilateral collaboration that we can find between the UK and German universities. Thank you all very much and have a good evening. Bye.